People ask me about my story sometimes. And I recognize that a lot of teachers don't really talk about their stories. They'll do it once and be done with it. And I get why. I don't care about my story except to understand that it isn't mine. It's just something that happened, and that it happened perfectly in the context of this moment from imperfect memories. So taking it all with a grain of salt. But from memory, this all happened in the perfect way to lead to this moment. Also, these minds in this game tend to be attached to this idea that a validation needs to come from a spiritual teacher having had a difficult time. So growing up, my mother was married 4 times. I technically have 8 siblings from various marriages. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of expectations. And I was having something like little mental breakdowns or emotional breakdowns as a kid because I was expected to constantly be shifting gears from one sport to another and also maintain a high level of academic performance and also be in extracurriculars that sometimes the schedules overlapped. And I had a parent who was feeding me ideas of having nervous breakdowns and all of this being too much. And I think the idea there was to ultimately sort of trauma bond with me. So trauma bonding and codependency were programmed from a young age. When I was 16, my uncle, who was a couple years older than me, passed away in a snowmobile accident on Christmas Eve. And at the time, this was the biggest blow my family had probably ever experienced. But then the next year on Christmas Eve, my mother was diagnosed with, I think at the time, I think it was colon and liver cancer, both stage 3, 4. She was told she had 1 month to live without treatment. And the deepest impression that I got from this was the fact that she herself did not want to get treatment. So not only was this another brush with mortality, but exposure to something going on in the psyche that I could not understand, and that I wouldn't understand for quite a few years. And then she did undergo treatment kind of from obligation because we all wanted her to. And then the following year on Christmas Eve, she passed away. And at that time, I was a freshman in college and away from home. And there was a lot of confusion in my family about my absence, about the fact that I was not there as much as they wanted me to be, even though I was doing what my mom really, really pushed and wanted me to be doing. So there was a lot of back and forth in my early life. What I wanted felt elusive and suppressed. It was hard to even know what that was. So early adulthood as a people pleaser, suppressing my grief, anxiety started to come up. I was also married at a young age, and he was in the military and was kicked out very suddenly. So I went from living in Hawaii in a very easy financial situation to back to my hometown with all my family's expectations and financially uncertain. So at this time, I experienced the first brush with deep and debilitating anxiety. I also consider this to be the first little valley in the terrain of awakening, in this case. But at the time, the decision was made to take medication and just let things settle and pass. A couple years later, working in a job I didn't like, that felt like I could lose my job at any time, that came to a head. I experienced debilitating anxiety again. I took meds, but this time I chose to look into meditation, and my yoga practice, which I had picked up actually in middle school, shifted beyond just a physical practice for me and started playing a greater role. This helped a lot. I began to connect with nature. I began to understand more about who I was, and I had some conditioning from childhood that it was dangerous to introspect. So meditation terrified me. It seemed like I was meddling in something I shouldn't be. But I stuck with it, and I found that there really was nothing dangerous there except the idea that there was danger there. So I began to really branch off from my childhood programming at that time. But for still quite a few years, I remained in a marriage where there were some very key differences in values, in ideology, and lifestyle. And that was out of a conditioned sense of obligation to just stay in something no matter what. At this time, there was still a great belief in duty. And eventually that found its way to dissolving. The more it seemed to me, the more I became myself, the more a rift was created or was more noticeable. So when I was about 30, when I was 30, I believe, that relationship ended peacefully, and I found myself in an entirely new world. New friends, dating, all these kinds of things, and this forced me to confront the idea of who I am as it relates to society. And yoga continued to deepen, meditation deepened. I was a massage therapist by this point and started my own business in that, and began to look at myself differently. But ultimately, this was still constructed self, looking at constructed self differently. on my own, life was pretty peaceful, but boundaries were weak, so continuing to let people into my life who brought chaos, and then questioning, why is this happening? Why is this always happening to me? So there were a lot of deep programming of that kind. In 2020, what was I? Maybe 35 or something. My business was shut down, and I chose to keep it shut down for quite a while. The sense of identity that I had built was completely shaken. I was cut off from friends, from the people who made me feel valued, from where I extracted my external sense of value, and I was stuck at home doing nothing, or really doing a lot of gardening, but nothing outwardly productive in a societal sense, let's say. And the idea of myself was quite shaken. And then amidst this, I reconnected with an old friend, and this turned into a relationship, which at the time there was such a sense of lack of myself and such a disconnection that many very obvious red flags were missed, so that I found myself, on top of everything else, now in what I would consider an abusive relationship that seemed to both provide and completely take away all stability from my life. So this ongoing chaos for the next couple of years shook the foundation of self to its core. There was heavy immersion in non-duality adjacent material. But I was starting to see a common thread in all these different books and videos. And then it reached a point where surrender was absolutely essential, because the resistance to life circumstances was so powerful that the body was falling apart. I mean, the health of the body was deteriorating. And there was a lot of programming around lack, self-pity. I should have more in life than I have, and I don't know how to do anything differently. As the health deteriorated, and there was a sense of helplessness, because the worse I feel, the less I feel that I can separate from this relationship and regain independence, regain what I had seemed to lose in my old lifestyle. The more this was happening, the more a kind of automatic surrender started to occur. I really could not take credit for this. At least not Heather, the character, can't. There's no merit in the relative for this unfolding this way. There was just a willingness, a will, a divine will, which began to emerge and take its rightful place in this experience, displacing the personal will. So the idea of what I want, or how I think things should go, started to fall apart, because there was such an obvious sense that the me does not know what it's doing, or how to do this. So in this situation, so-called awakening was arising amidst also what I would consider, I was never diagnosed, but what I would consider CPTSD, an ongoing deep chaos and sense of no foundation with no obvious single cause, and a lack of ability to be at ease with anything. There was a lot of fear of other people, a lack of trust, because if those closest to me can't be trusted or can't be counted upon for any kind of consistency, then I could not expect that from any of these random people. Amidst this shift, I began to recognize that there was an automatic attraction to different kinds of things, different kinds of people, and also a longing for my own company, for solitude, and for space, to let all the pieces fall to, let's say, the table, so that I could start to make some sense of what they all were. To backtrack a little, I should also note that during COVID, with everything falling apart, there was also a family falling out, which from this perspective, I would describe as having resulted from my speaking up for myself, and not doing it in a perfect way, but doing it from my perspective, in a way that was where care was taken not to hurt people. And still in this, it wasn't good enough. So this was tied into this, all this other stuff. Because this was sort of emerging amidst such a chaotic time, and this was not some instant awakening where suddenly all was continuously right with the world. There was a vast swinging between two states. The way I would describe this as continuing to unfold is like a slow flowering or an emerging from a chrysalis. There can at times be a kind of struggle. The ego asserts itself into the experience again. Attention is absorbed into it. And yet at all times there is a knowing what has been made real in this experience, which allows me to walk myself back to myself each time with less time in the relative experience away from myself. There's become a gradual recognition that I do not need anything, and a freedom with that. But at the same time, there's a stickiness to certain aspects of those beliefs. If you were to ask me, I know the answer, and yet the mind is able to run kind of on a low volume in the background, still pushing certain ideas, and the body following suit, for at least for a time. So this one thing that is that is known beyond mind is now integrating itself into all that is of the mind. But this integrating, I find, is effortless, so that whenever mind plays this game of let's awaken and let's really work on things today and work past us a sticky idea, it doesn't really do anything. And then when I say I'm too tired, I'm just gonna rest, that's actually the thing. To effortlessly rest as myself is the thing. And remembering that sooner and sooner is the catalyst for presence, for increased presence in this, and increased instances and lengths of time of the experience of joy, bliss, relief, silence, whatever it is. It seems to me, retrospectively, that each experience has within it holes. I, simultaneously powering all these different experiences, have the opportunity in each one to awaken to myself based on this combination of circumstances, we could say karma, simply by where my attention is placed in this moment. What I would describe as holes in this experience, looking back, are little things, like the fact that this body is seemingly much more sensitive in every way to most of the ones around it. And so its experience was of being different, not enough, a burden to others. And this became the suffering that became the fuel for awakening. And there are little things, moments of oneness, being in the middle of a stressful situation and simply staring at a tree, and suddenly this tree, this experience of tree, opens and expands, and it's like my experience is shared with the tree, or I am one with the tree. And then to have that fall away and be left with mind's wanderings, what was that? Why was that like that? And to slowly gain some context to these experiences, what I've come to see is that the experiences themselves meant very little. Any insight that is actually retained beyond the experience is the thing. That's what is real. That is what cannot be lost, cannot be taken from me. The fact that in 8th grade, I happened to work at a library where I happened upon a book about yoga. And I showed my mother, and she had great resistance to it and dismissed it as a cult and dangerous. All of this informed my journey. It gave me exactly what I needed to veer off path and come back, having understood, or beyond understanding. in the context of sitting in my car and making videos, the things that have happened in this life have happened in such a way that suddenly this thing has emerged as something effortless that resonates, that is enjoyable, that yields results that are, in my experience, profound and gratifying beyond the person. So what I find is that each experience has the opportunity, in letting go of the person and yet retaining any insight gained from these experiences of suffering. Each experience has an opportunity to play its part, and it could just be in the random conversations we have with people. It could be in the relationships that we already have, or the proximity we have to new people that we may meet with this new understanding or new perspective. There has always been an aversion to intellectual speak, which I find that now resonates with so many. And funny enough, I think that this came from a kind of stoic, rural, Midwestern upbringing, which isn't ultimately beneficial. But what I took away from it was the ability to relate from the heart and to see through walls. This experience has shown me that personal merit is just another illusion. Everything happening out here, out there, is a cause and effect, clockwork precise game of chaos, until I understand that I am not that. And from that point, I can diverge from this addictive, automatic, overwhelming flow of events. There's nothing special about Heather. There was nothing special about Buddha. There was nothing special about Jesus. What we might call special in these experiences was the transcendent of the ordinary, automatic character. And that's not personal. That's not a personal unfolding. Who I am showed myself to myself in various forms through one form in which circumstances place themselves in such a way. And I find that to be the most humbling, freeing aspect of all of this. I don't have to take credit or blame or shame or match up to expectations from outside based on the appearance of this experience and what it may be, what it should add itself up to. And when I say I don't have to, I mean you. You don't have to. None of this has to adhere to that. Mm-hmm. As you see, Kundalini is also an ongoing experience, which recently is intensifying, and this is something that I find that I'll be in the position to speak on more and more with folks who are experiencing this. I didn't do any of this. This highly orchestrated dance is playing itself out exactly as it's meant to do. And the more we relinquish the character and allow divine will to come in, the more it is experienced this way via other forms.